Joey Goone, welcome to the show.
It's great to be here, Nick. Thanks for having me.
So you're the president of Utopia Experience. What is Utopia Experience?
We are an event agency, been around since my mom started it in 2001, and we do event planning and event production for national conferences, summits, and masterminds all over the country, and really started getting into impact and, nonprofit work during COVID when nonprofits couldn't gather in person. And so we've helped a couple hundred charities since then as well. And so, doing nonprofit charity work is a huge part of our mission and what we do as well.
So your mother started it. What was going on with her? How did she come up with starting this business?
She was a teacher. And the backstory is her and my dad, if you're familiar with the Jewish rite of passage at 12 going on 13 years old, boys and girls in Jewish faith have this rite of passage where you have a bar or a bat mitzvah, which says that you were stepping into adulthood. And so my brother, who was 2 years older than me, my parents were planning for his bar mitzvah. My mom and dad hired a local event planning and production agency here in St. Louis, and they felt transactionalized, like almost reduced to a number on a piece of paper. And the story goes something like they had the event and it was fine. And then the following week, when you're on the bar bat mitzvah circuit and your kids are running in those circles, you as the parents are also invited because you're in those friend groups. You're invited to a different bar bat mitzvah every weekend. And so such was the case after my brother's bar mitzvah. My parents were a guest at one of my brother's friends' bar mitzvahs the following weekend. And they ran into that event agency. My dad ran into the owner of all places in the bathroom in the urinal standing side by side with him. And he didn't remember my dad's name. He didn't remember anything about the event that they did with my dad and the family last week. And matter of fact, he made some kind of lewd remark about last week's bar mitzvah being kind of a shit show because he wasn't feeling well. And my dad made a comment that I was last week's bar mitzvah. And so after that, my mom said, we won't ever spend any money with him again. That's terrible. That's not the way that I would do business with dignity and professionalism and, quality of service and respect. And so for my bar mitzvah 2 years later, they flew in a company from Chicago. And that company, my mom was like, wow, if we could bring that level of service and experience to St. Louis and do it at a price where, it cost them a mortgage payment times three to bring that company in from Chicago, and you're paying for their hotel and their airfare, and you're paying for a team of, 6, 7, 8 people to come to St. Louis. My mom said, this doesn't exist here. Let's do it here. So she leaned on those Chicago companies, got mentorship and guidance, professional coaching from them to say like, hey, what can I do to start something like this here locally? And so she was a teacher at the time, fifth grade teacher. She tried out for a while. She tried out gym teaching, but she realized that she didn't have much of an athletic bone in her body. So she she went back to fifth grade, and she was working really 50% in both and 100% in neither as a part-time teacher, and also trying to launch this thing from our family childhood kitchen table.
That's a great story. So you mentioned there that this didn't exist in St. Louis, the experience or the type of company that you brought in from Chicago. So I'm surprised, St. Louis is somewhat of a small city, but it's still a city, and they just didn't have a good events planner at that time.
Not in this space. The saturated market. I don't know if you've heard of like the red ocean or blue ocean strategy, but the red ocean strategy here in St. Louis was go attack the wedding space because everybody gets married. And this was a very niche market or niche market. And you really had to understand the process of bar and bat mitzvahs and what families are looking for and that kind of celebration because it's so intimate and it's so important in Jewish faith. And because my mom was walking that walk and had the experience in producing that event, not just with my brother, but then with me and subsequently with my sister a couple years later, she could relate to those Jewish parents who were going through that same walk, that same journey. And for her, that was it, leaning into her own personal experience to say, here are the mistakes that I made. I'm going to help ensure that you don't make those same mistakes.
And so when she did launch it, what did the trajectory look like? Was she doing one event a year, or like immediately she's got one every weekend?
Yeah, I look, are you familiar with Alex Hormozy? Alex Hormozy has the core four. It's like cold outreach, warm outreach, and then one-to-one, one-to-many. At the very beginning, it was just warm outreach, one-to-one. My mom was reaching out to friends and family members saying, hey, I've hung a shingle. out of my, my kitchen home in my, in my, my house. And here's what we're doing. And the first event she ever did, I want to say was my sister's. And then from there, a couple of neighbors and friends in neighboring communities, and it just started to snowball as people realized that, wow, there's actually a company here that's bringing New York and Chicago style production to the local St. Louis market.
The business model obviously expanded beyond those types of events. What is that story?
The biggest change for us was honestly during COVID. I think that was the pivot point where we really found our North Star. So my mom, I was climbing the corporate ladder, if you will, doing financial services. My mom was scaling this company. My dad was in the corporate world, working at Brown Shoe Caleres here in St. Louis as the head of sales, or one of the VPs of sales. And so he was in the shoe business. My mom was teaching, doing this on the side. I was in the financial services business. And unfortunately, my mom was diagnosed with cancer in 2012 and lost her battle in 2013. And in 2016, 17, my dad and I decided to jump in part-time. And I was splitting my time between financial services and this. And then in 2019, we finally got to the point where I decided I'm going to make a bold move and go full time, which was the perfect time to do so because a few months later, COVID hit. And so in March 2020, I get a call from Shannon Eason, who's an amazing fundraising auctioneer for charity dinners. And she says, you have to call my friend Karen. She's freaking out. So I call Karen, who's the head of fundraising for a school in Chicago for gifted kids. And their gala is supposed to happen in a ballroom with 300 people that Saturday. But Illinois just shut down. And so Karen says to me, what do we do? And I asked her, what are your goals? What happens if we don't do this event? Can we wait until next year or 6 months down the road? We're supposed to open back up. What does that look like? And she says, if we don't have this fundraiser now, we can't pay our staff and we can't pay the scholarship funds for students who can't afford to be here. We have to do this. And so we brainstormed as a team. And ultimately, what we had a little bit of experience at the time in AV. We had someone on our staff who had a background in broadcast and media production. We had this entertainment production side. And so we had all these puzzle pieces. And we brought all the puzzle pieces together and we decided that the way to do this for Karen was to put on a virtual event. And so we created watch parties where people from the comfort and the safety of their own homes could tune in and watch it in their living rooms. And Karen and the head of the school drove from Illinois to our St. Louis studio. We produced the first virtual gala in the country using green screens and cameras. And we broadcasted the event from our studio to all their homes. Created this really cool main stage experience from our central hub in St. Louis. And what was really cool is these gifted kids in Chicago, they have this robotics club that competes nationally. And so we had these robot dinosaurs, and using green screen technology, we made them look like they're walking through Jurassic Park, and then we auctioned them off. We sent care packages to everybody's home up in Illinois that was watching from home. And then we brought a mixologist on virtually to teach people through the screen how to make the cocktails in the care packages that we had sent them. And then we made it so that Karen and the head of school and Shannon, the fundraising auctioneer, could see everyone's faces on the screen while they were doing the auction and presenting from our studio. And we raised $300,000 that night for the school. And for us, we had proof of concept. And so I went on a podcast tour urging nonprofits to not cancel their galas. And we ended up producing north of 200 galas from our studio. We raised about $30 million for charities, which is now north of $50 million. And when those organizations went back to live events in late 21, early 22, they hired us as their event agency. And so that innovation, that pivot grew our company to 150% nearly overnight. But what mattered most is my team and I cried every night because we heard another story of another charity that was genuinely making the world a better place. And, funding for young teens or orphanages, a women's shelter or a woman's shelter. We did a virtual gala for a tiger sanctuary on the East Coast, after school programs. And it was incredibly fulfilling, and it was giving us all these things that the bar and bat mitzvah industry and the private event industry didn't give us. Not to say that those events aren't meaningful in their own right, but the charity work it just flipped on a switch in our hearts, and we're like, this is it for us. Like, this is where we need to be. And we just realized that money without impact is empty. And one of my mentors said to me, there's no shame in making money. There's only shame in making money without helping other people. And so that really became the impetus for us. I guess by luck, good fortune, good timing, and having a bold idea, we stumbled into the into the space of audiovisual and production. And from there, we started producing, galas live and bigger national conferences and masterminds, which is where we are today.
And that's an incredible story. I think you said you produced the first virtual gala during the COVID era. Is that correct?
It was either us or there was one other agency that produced one either the day before or the day after us. But I like to
You're going to take the claim.
I like to still claim. Yeah, I'm gonna take the claim.
And it also sounded like you pulled that off very quickly from the first call, discovering the need to actually pulling off the event.
Yeah, it was about a week. About a week we figured it out.
How in the world did you pull that together in a week?
Just a nimble team with a can-do attitude. We had things inevitably go wrong at events, and what I love so much about our team is our ability to, there's some groups, some AV agencies and event production companies that are much larger than us, and they move like rabbits. Or I'm sorry, they move like sloths,
Yeah,
and we
right.
move like rabbits.
Yeah, yeah.
And see, even I got the expression wrong. Isn't that hilarious? And so I think it's just our agility and our ability to adapt. Some groups, even in our industry, clients come to us and they're like, "Oh my gosh, you guys respond on the fly." When I have a late night question or I can't sleep because there's this thing that I'm dealing with my event and it's coming up in a couple weeks, our team genuinely cares and they're going to text you back at 10 p.m. on a Saturday, because not all the time. I don't want to set that expectation, but our team's just accessible, and it's genuinely because they care about the work, and that nimbleness and that adaptability and our ability to, on site, to respond when there's adversity. Inevitably, when things happen at events and those things arise, we smile and we respond with grace, and most importantly, we find solutions. And such was the case with this adaptation or this pivot. Is This was by necessity. We had to help out one of our friends, and that was just something that it wasn't a can we do this? It was a how are we going to make this happen for Karen?
I definitely agree with one of the things you mentioned there is it's amazing how just responding to the customer, how far that goes, because so many companies get that wrong. Just respond quickly. That's really all they're looking for. And I don't want to get too much into the technical weeds, but my company is an IT company, so I have a lot of questions again on how you pulled this off in a week. But even at that time, standing up whatever platform you use, Zoom or whatever, standing that up with the amount of bandwidth needed for a large audience is not a trivial thing. And I mean, that's just one of like 100 things I can think of that you probably had to get going in a week's time.
Yeah, the biggest thing for us was we immediately upgraded our internet because we knew we'd be pulling a tremendous amount of bandwidth. And at the time, we had, like, I don't know, we weren't doing virtual events out of our studio. And so we had the lowest package from our internet provider. And we're like, nope, we need fiber. We need this kind of, these mesh routers and all these things to make it. So you're right, man. It was like the day after we got that call, the team mobilized. And it was wild, all of the things that we had to accomplish before going live that following Saturday.
Meanwhile, also managing your own COVID procedures, right? I presume you had to do some of this work together or in person as a team, and you had to manage that issue on top of everything else.
Yeah, and we didn't know at the time. It's like, there's a tremendous amount of concerns for our own safety, and we're all trying to social distance, and we're wearing masks, and we're moving at 100 miles an hour in the studio to try and get everything set up. We're painting walls and making green walls, and we're buying cameras, and we're doing all the things that were required of us to produce this virtual event, and trying to do so in a way we were trying to be mindful of the space and all the things that we needed to consider for our own safety.
Well, again, what a crazy story. And then you mentioned how that really accelerated your growth doing 200 plus events. I think you mentioned growing 150%. Talk me through that. So how did you lead through that type of growth personally? What was your approach to leading through that?
My mom taught me this when she would run practices in our living room in the early 2000s. And she would say that personality matters more than ability. That something like aptitude is more is important. Aptitude is important, but attitude is more important. And she always talked about being able to teach skills, but you can't teach someone to care. And so in this spirit, what I'm good at is seeing people's energy, which gives me clues into their potential. And so in leadership, I'm just trying to create space for people to surprise themselves. Try to, lead through belief. And when somebody joins our team, I tell them straight up, I'm hiring you because I believe you're better at this than I am. So teach me and show us what's possible. And I try to use questions more than directives and answers. Asking questions of the staff like, what would make this feel aligned? Or if we were celebrating in 12 months or 3 years from now, what would we be celebrating? What would you do, or what do you think the company should do if you knew we couldn't fail? What lights you up? What do you think sucks? What should we change? And I think that's it. My biggest leadership tool is admitting that I don't know what I don't know. And I used to think as a leader, I needed to have all the answers, but a better, more conscious solution for me was just to say that I don't know, and then turn to the team and say, what do you guys think? And, when I'm struggling with something, I share it with the team, and that level of vulnerability really gives permission for everyone else to be human too, realizing that we're all just figuring it out together. And that leadership approach created a tremendous amount of solidarity and buy-in.
And how big is your team?
Right now, we have 11 full-time, 25-ish total employees with part-time included.
Tell me some of the work you do outside of the nonprofit sector.
The biggest part of our portfolio right now are conferences, summits, and mastermind events. I also serve on the board of EO, which is Entrepreneurs Organization. I'm the learning chair. And so I am responsible for bringing really cool learning experiences to my mastermind group here in St. Louis. And so to give you an example of what happened this past week, last week up to Sunday, actually, team got back Sunday night. We were in San Diego producing a conference for an organization that is directly connected to the Social Security Administration of the United States of America. So the commissioner of the Social Security Administration and a bunch of other lobbyists and politicians and attorneys were in the room talking about the future of Social Security. Then we fly back on Sunday. Our 53-foot truck comes back Monday with all of our gear from the West Coast. Our team is frantically unloading into our warehouse and loading up another truck to head out to an EO event that I'm producing for our community here. There's about 100 of us. So this last event was about 1,500 on the West Coast. And this event was a mastermind event with 100 entrepreneurs local to St. Louis at Energizer Stadium, which you're wearing St. Louis City hat. So shout out to the team. And it was this beautiful backdrop. We're in the, I can't remember the name of the private room, but we're overlooking the field. And this was an event with Jeff Hoffman, who's been mentoring me in business for about 10 years. And he is the co-founder of Priceline and Ubid, which were two companies he took to IPO. One of his earlier companies was he actually founded the airport kiosk. He wrote the code and sold that company for a couple $100 million. So if you go up to the airport kiosk and scan your boarding pass, that was his first company. And it was just an honor to be able to, do that event in San Diego, which was much more, it was big and a lot of different breakout rooms and a lot of things going on, a lot of production in the space. And then the dichotomy of that is, then we come back to St. Louis and have this much more intimate event, with just one main room and everybody sort of glued to this fireside chat to hear Jeff's story. And so I think that kind of underscores the kind of events that we do. The big events that are very high pressure, high stakes with lots of moving pieces and lots of breakouts, all the way to this EO event, which was transformational in its own right. And it's just, one room with a bunch of entrepreneurs to hear from one keynote speaker.
Yeah, those are great examples. I'm curious, how do potential customers find you, right? So you mentioned this very large Social Security related conference in California. And you go back to the beginning of your story where your mother couldn't find the resource she wanted. So naturally she goes to one of the big cities like Chicago in your case, but maybe you might think of New York or you're not going to think of St. Louis instinctually, right?
Yeah.
So how do these really large opportunities in other states very far away from us in Missouri, why do they come to you and how do they find you?
Well, we've gotten really good at doubling down on Alex Hormozy's core, core four. First, it was cold outreach to people that we don't know, and one to one. And now we're really doubling down on the one to many approach, and the one to many cold outreach, and to the one to many warm outreach. And so for us, the strategy, pulling the two levers, any business is really sales and marketing. And so for on the sales side, we're reaching out to our clients and we're saying, hey, who do you know that could benefit from the value of what we're providing? And a lot of those organizations that are running in the circle of being in the event space, in the event industry, they've got friends that are doing the same thing. So that's been really helpful for us. And then on the one to many cold outreach side, it's ads, doing Google ads, short form content, getting on podcasts like this and just sharing the message with people, hoping that it resonates and that I'm adding value in some way. And we try to attract those people back to our ecosystem and say, hey, we're doing events differently, and really trying to create transformational experiences. And if we can serve you in some capacity, would love to have a conversation.
I think you just explained it, but can you tell me more detail of this phrase one to many, the cold and warm? What does that really mean?
Yeah, one to one is, me, if I sent you a message and said, hey, Nick, we're an event company. Do you guys at Enzo, do you guys produce events? Would love to earn your business. One to many is basically just doing that, but really doing it on the internet in a way where there might be a couple hundred or a couple thousand people that scroll past that post on LinkedIn, or the Google ad that we're paying for. And so it's just, am I reaching directly out to a human being, or am I in the the
Just mass marketing type activity, it sounds like, right?
yeah, I was going to say, am I in the noise of, everybody else's content, where, on different social platforms and on Google, and really trying to stand out in that way?
Is there some nuance to this approach that is perhaps a little bit different than, it sounds like, general sales activity, right? So you're going to do exactly what you described. I'm going to go try to pitch whatever customer I'm doing, but also I've got my marketing out ahead of me trying to provide air cover. But is there some nuance to what Alex is doing in describing it this way?
What do you mean by that? Could you clarify?
Well, so I'm trying to think of a way to say it without being too simple, because that's what you described to me sounds just like what I do in sales and marketing, right? I don't have a label for it like the one to one or the one to many. So I'm just curious if there's something else in Alex's approach using those labels that is kind of maybe a next level of the activity, or how you're doing these outreaches.
Yeah, I think for us, it's just an oversimplification. Is just consistency. Consistency is key. Gary Vee talks about it. Alex Hormozy. I mean, there are a bunch of other entrepreneurs in the space that really just talk about the idea of being disciplined and consistent. With this podcast episode, just being able to pull the video and the sound bites, we might get 10 to 15 short form sound bites that we could then, to use your word, use as air coverage from a marketing perspective, and throw it out there on social media over the course of the next, roll it out over the course of the next 30 days, and that becomes content. Another really interesting thing we do, Nick, is when we're at an event, say for like Jeff Hoffman, this event we did with EO a couple days ago, or on the West Coast, we have our film team there because 99% of the time, these organizations are asking us for sizzle reels or highlights of the event or recorded sessions. And so our video team is there, right? And so one of the things that they're doing in the downtime, during the downtime or in between sessions or breaks, is they're filming sort of a behind the scenes look at what it takes to produce an event of this magnitude, this capacity. And then we're sending it back to the client. And not only does it serve as social proof for us to say, hey, we're fun, look at us, we're on site, we're having a great time, and we're producing this wonderful experience with all these humans coming together to create community, but it also highlights the organization in such a way where they too want to use that piece of material to promote the good stuff that they're doing at their event, and hopefully attract new attendees or sponsors to want to engage in some capacity. So our content, when we're out there filming, not only serves our marketing strategy, but could also or could also serve that of our client. And so there's a cross-pollination effect that happens when we're filming all of that content. It's the rising tide lifts all boats. We're filming content for our own social media strategy, and we're also offering it up to our clients for them to put it out there as well.
Do you mind if I ask a very self-serving question?
Shoot.
I'm just curious if you do events like what I'm about to describe is, companies like ours and many others often do events for their customers, right? Like the classic example is hosting all your customers and prospects at a suite in a baseball game, right? That's people have been doing that type of stuff forever. But I'm curious, are you doing anything that goes beyond that with clients, and kind of what might you see that's really effective? Because I think people get tired of sometimes doing the same thing year over year.
Doing something different beyond the traditional dinner, which used to be my world. In the wealth management world, we are wined and dined by, suppliers and, mutual fund managers who want to fly us out to really fancy place locations just to, to earn our business. And I think there's a place for that. There's a space for that for sure, but there's also an opportunity to build deeper connection and meaning in the culture. And so maybe instead of a steak dinner, you create a storytelling night where your customers share how your product or service impacted their lives, and your employees can then share what it means to serve them. And so we recently did that. And what happened is the customers really felt special because they got to get on stage and share the story. And of course, there were awards handed out and there were tears shed, and the whole thing was captured on camera. So not only was all of that community and that connection felt that night, but there was a whole go-to-market strategy with all the content that was captured that became the marketing strategy for that company over the course of the next 3 to 6 months. And so it wasn't just about the customers feeling special, but also the employees walking away with completely different levels of pride. Because I think in our business as well, we oftentimes forget to celebrate the little victories and hear firsthand how our work is making a difference and feel like we're a part of a bigger community serving people. And so doing an event like that, whether it's an award ceremony where you highlight customers and success stories, or a dinner, you can do this in a more intimate setting. What we're after in these kinds of experiences is to create a sense of belonging, which cultivates an energy of we're in this together. And that's the kind of story that we want our clients to carry with them long after events end. And so I'd encourage you to do something different, but start with the outcome and ask yourself, what's the story that I want people to walk away with when they leave? Because if you get that right, you've transformed an ordinary gathering into something unforgettable.
Tell me about some of the family business aspect. So did you come in as president? Was that your role right when you came in?
Yeah, and to us, it's not so much the title. And in a small business, we really don't have a ton of hierarchy, and so the name wasn't always president. And candidly, I still have imposter syndrome putting president behind my name because yesterday I'm having dinner with Jeff Hoffman. I'm sitting at the table with Mike Chaffin, who's Nellie's business partner, and then after that, we're sitting with a couple of other really successful business people in St. Louis that are running companies that are in the hundreds of millions of dollars, and here I am running a few $1 million company, and these guys are presidents, and so I think no matter where you are in business, there's always going to be that level of imposter syndrome. And Jeff shared this story about how he was with a friend, and this friend said, Jeff, you got to come to the marina. You got to come to the marina and see this boat. I've been working all my life, and all I wanted to do was buy the biggest boat in the marina. And so Jeff's like, I don't want to go to the marina to see your boat. This is a silly thing. Like, I've got more important things to do with my time than to see this big boat that you were able to finally purchase. That's ridiculous. And he goes, no, Jeff, please, I'm begging you, just come see the boat. And so he takes Jeff out on his massive boat, which I don't know how big, maybe a 100+ foot yacht. And they're going around in the marina, they're boating around or yachting around, and this guy is pointing to all the other boats and saying, your boat is smaller, and your boat is smaller, and your boat is smaller. And Jeff's like, can you just take me back to the marina? This is silly, and this is ridiculous. This is vanity and materialism, and it just doesn't feel aligned with where I am in my life and who I am. And so he's like, fine, I'll take you back to the marina. And all of a sudden, it's this beautiful sunny day, and it gets incredibly cloudy. And Jeff's like, oh, is it, it's going to storm? It's like the sun was, completely gone. There's overcast skies. And Jeff turns around and he says, I kid you not, there is a boat so massive behind his boat that it blocks the sun out of the sky. And the guy says, all right, Jeff, get off my boat. I have to go back to work. And so obviously the moral of the story being there's always going to be somebody out there that has a bigger boat. And so success is found in the journey, not the destination. It's not found in the title, but the impact.
You're absolutely right. That's a tough lesson to learn. It takes a long time to get experiences under your belt to get there, at least in my case. So tell me about EO, right? So you mentioned being a board member there. I'm just guessing, reaching the state of a board member, you've been involved with the organization for quite a while.
Yeah, I've been in for about 2.5 years and I love the organization. For such a long time, I felt in business that I had to, you have to do it yourself. And I'm bootstrapping this thing and trying to grow it organically. And one of the biggest challenges that I've had is when I run into a new obstacle, I am looking for a community of other people who are further along in their journey than I am so that I can compress time and not make the same mistakes. Well, I'm fine making the mistakes and learning the lessons from them, but perhaps, somebody has navigated a similar journey and just hearing those experience shares has been exceptionally valuable. I think the biggest thing for me is with EO is you stop feeling like you have to figure everything out alone and you get challenged and supported in equal measure. And you walk into rooms where every single person just gets it because they're walking the same path as you are as an entrepreneur.
I'm familiar with Vistage. How does EO compare to Vistage? Is, the same kind of thing, a monthly meeting and different events throughout the year?
Yeah, we have a forum, so about 150 members here in St. Louis, and you meet with your forums, which is a group, a more intimate group of 8 to 10 people once a month, and then we have learning events that are typically happening, monthly. There's bigger ones that are happening quarterly, and yeah, it's just a big think tank or syndicate of different individuals, and of course we stay connected through. There's a WhatsApp chat for local. There's a regional chat. There are different national and global initiatives that you can get involved in as well to continue your entrepreneurial and your leadership journey. They've always got something going on so that you can continue being a student of life and a student of leadership. I'm not as familiar with Vistage though, but perhaps they're similar.
Yeah, it's similar. I think perhaps a little bit smaller scale. And I could be getting this wrong, so don't anybody hold me to it. But it's CEO roundtable. So it's just as you described it, it's maybe 8 or 10 business owners. They meet monthly. I believe it's like a day long. I'm not in it currently, but have been in and out of it over the years. They'll bring in speakers to the local groups, et cetera. I think it's very similar. But if I remember right, EO has some certain revenue criteria to be in, and I'm not sure Vistage has that same those same thresholds. But again, I could have all that completely wrong.
Yeah, EO, they've got an accelerator program, which is if you're over 250,000, you qualify, and then the EO program itself is over 1 million in revenue.
Okay. Yeah.
And then our big brothers and big sisters in YPO, I think it's 10 to 15 million.
Yeah, I think that's right. What's the future hold for your company? Where are you going?
We are we are on the path to 2 million EBITDA in 5 years. And I thought that I wanted to sell eventually because there's this unspoken expectation that exiting is the finish line. And so I asked one of my mentors that question, and he said, the journey is the destination, which I talked about a couple of minutes ago. And so in his case, he knew that exiting was the right move. But in many smaller entrepreneurial businesses like mine, where organic growth is the way and we're bootstrapping it, there's no, institutional funding or outside investors or PE firms that are looking at us, at least at this point in our business. And so there's really no pressure for me to be acquired or to exit. And so I'm leaning more into the fact that the journey is the destination. And as long as I'm having fun and I'm building the company to a point where our employees feel a level of significance and support, it feels aligned for me.
Well, I mean, that's really interesting. I'm actually surprised to hear you say that you were thinking that you were approaching a sale at some point. I mean, you clearly aren't of retirement age. Why did you have that seed in your head?
It's the societal condition, I think, in the entrepreneurial community that exiting is the mountaintop. that the exit is what everybody is trying to achieve or accomplish. Build the company to a point where it becomes attractive enough where you can get out and do something else. And what I'm realizing is the something else that I want to do is this. This is the something else. There is no other thing that intrigues me, at least at this point in my life. And so that was really just a narrative that was spun up in me. That was some, you know, conditioning that I've learned along the way, or things that I've heard from other entrepreneurs that I've kind of had to unlearn and train my mind to think that way. And so, yeah, I've just recently come into this feeling and this mindset of, as long as I'm having fun and I go to work every day feeling as though I'm making an impact and I'm enjoying the journey and I'm enjoying the team, then if the company does 2 million EBITDA and I know what I need to make, I even told my director of operations, who I'm soon going to promote to COO, it's like, I know what I need to make. I know what my wife Steph needs to make, who's in our marketing department. And I want to put away $100,000 a year for charity work, for contributions and giving back, so we can eventually do nonprofit work for free, whether it's in the way of grants, or I'm not sure how we're going to do that yet. But I want to underwrite nonprofit events and video stories for them so we can really help those that are helping the world. And I said to Jordy, anything above and beyond that is yours. You divvy it up amongst the team how you feel appropriate, split the profits. And my goal is to get the company to the point where we can do that for everyone instead of exit, because I feel that level of responsibility to the team. And so I just want to continue growing and learning and moving through the process, which matters more than any destination.
We obviously don't know each other, haven't met before this conversation, but I appreciate the story that you just shared, and almost want to say that I'm glad to hear that you've had this conversion of thinking you need to sell versus having something for the long term. Are you familiar with the ETA, entrepreneurship through acquisition concept? Have you heard this term lately? So ETA, or search funds, is another term. It's basically, there's all these fancy terms for people wanting to go buy small businesses, just like yours or mine. Not that they're small, but they're of the size where an individual could potentially acquire them, right? Based on the valuations of these size of businesses. And there's this huge ecosystem that has developed around entrepreneurship through acquisition. My point of this story is, there are a lot of people actively out looking to buy businesses like yours or mine, because they want to have the life that you just described. You know, it sounds like you got influence perhaps from the venture capital community. I had that early in career where it's all about exiting and flipping and private equity. But now it just seems like there's this really strong and growing community that recognizes the value of a small business and holding that forever. You make 2 million, $3 million of EBITDA a year, do that for 30 years. That's pretty awesome.
Pretty good life. Yeah. And I've had to remind myself of that, because the more you scale, the heavier it gets, at least in my experience. And I think I'm just in that season right now of scaling from a company that had no systems and structure and processes, to now having to adopt all of those things and do it in a way that creates organizational excellence and still maintains a culture of psychological safety and care, and doesn't transactionalize our business in a way where the world, I think, what's the way to frame this? There is rewards in the world for transactionalizing business, meaning you can do more faster if you transactionalize it. But I think true impact comes from leaning into humanizing it and creating those real relationships. And so I don't want to lose the soul of what we've created, but also I know in order to scale, we need to be smarter with structure and systems and processes. So it's that delicate balance right now of how to adopt that without losing the North Star and losing the soul.
And Joy, I think that's a great way to perhaps summarize the discussion. And it's clear that you actually mean and believe that, right? So a lot of people will say these things and you can tell that they don't. It's obvious that you do. So I really appreciate you sharing that. Would you like to share any ways that folks could find you if they're interested?
Absolutely. Yeah. Company website is utopiaexperience.com. And you can find me on LinkedIn, Joey Goone. I don't think there are that many literal goons on LinkedIn. There might be a couple figurative ones, I'm sure many, but you'll be able to find me.
Joey Goone in St. Louis should be pretty easy. So, Joey Goone, thank you for spending time with me today and sharing some of these stories. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Nick.